portal to the universe. You are listening to Risale Podcasts.
Have you ever really thought about a fly? I mean, just how much has to go right for a fly to exist? It's crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
You'd need some kind of blueprint, right? Like DNA
Right.
or something. And then all these tiny little machines would have to build it from nothing. It just seems wild, if there wasn't some kind of intelligence behind it all.
It's amazing how something so small can make us think about such huge questions.
Right. And that's kind of what we're diving into today. You sent over a bunch of texts all about Islamic belief and well, you were really curious about the logic behind it all.
Yeah, the why behind the what.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at these texts, philosophical treatises, discussions about faith, all sorts of things, not to debate anything, but just to understand how they explain these beliefs using, reason and logic.
What kind of evidence do they present to support these ideas?
Right. And one of the most fundamental things they talk about is, well, God.
Of course, that's the foundation of it all.
Yeah. The idea of one God, or Tawhid, as it's called in Arabic. And the texts offer some pretty interesting arguments for this.
Okay, I'm curious. What kind of arguments?
Well, one that really stood out to me is this idea of universal order and balance. You look at the universe, right? Galaxies, stars, planets, even our own bodies. Everything works with this incredible precision, like a perfect equilibrium.
It's true, there's a sense of interconnectedness.
Yeah, and the texts argue that this order, this balance, it points to a single, all-powerful intelligence behind it all. They say that if there were multiple powers at play, things would be way more chaotic.
Makes sense. Like too many cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly. They compare it to a machine, like a really complex one. Every part needs to be designed by one mind for it to work properly.
So it's not just about the order itself, but also how everything seems to work together.
Exactly. It's like everything, despite being so different, is connected and has a purpose. And a lot of times, that purpose is related to us, to humans.
Okay, so they're saying that either everything in the universe understands and obeys humans, which is obviously not true.
Right. Or there's one incredibly powerful being who designed it all.
A single creator who set everything in motion. So what about natural causes? How do they explain things like evolution?
That's where things get really interesting. They actually argue pretty strongly against attributing creation solely to, random chance or unintelligent natural processes.
Yeah.
They use this example of a fly, which is, it's brilliant, really.
Okay, what about a fly?
They say, imagine nature trying to create a fly. To do that, it would need a separate mold or machine for each tiny part of the fly, right?
Each little egg, each wing.
Yeah, all the microscopic bits. It would just be so incredibly complex. And how could unintelligent forces with no plan or foresight ever achieve that?
So they're not saying that nature can't create, but that it can't create something as complex as a fly without some kind of intelligent guidance.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of manifestation of divine names comes in. It's just this really cool concept where they explain that all the amazing qualities we attribute to God, like being all-knowing, all-powerful, all-merciful.
Those attributes are reflections of a single source.
Yeah. They say these qualities are manifested in all of creation. Think of sunlight, right? It has all these properties: light, heat, different wavelengths.
And those properties are reflected in different ways depending on what the sunlight touches.
Exactly. It's like that with God's attributes.
Yeah.
They're reflected in all the diverse things we see in the universe.
It's a really beautiful way of looking at it.
And there's this other idea they talk about called ease of creation. They're basically saying that for a being with unlimited power, creating something huge like a giant spring is no harder than creating something tiny like a flower. It's all equally easy.
That makes sense if we're talking about a being who transcends our limited understanding of effort and scale.
Right. It points to this idea of a single, all-powerful creator behind everything. So, okay, we've talked about God, but what about guidance? If there is a creator, wouldn't they guide us?
It's a logical question to ask.
And that's where prophethood comes in. The texts argue that it's necessary, humans are given this incredible intelligence, this ability to understand things.
This God-given ability to reason and make connections.
Exactly. And they say that because of that, it makes sense that God would choose the most perfect human, the most exemplary individual as a guide for everyone else. And that individual, they say, is Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Interesting. So how do they connect this to previous scriptures? to like the Torah and the Bible.
They actually put a lot of emphasis on that. They say those scriptures contain references to Muhammad's prophethood, like specific names, descriptions, even predictions about a prophet coming from a different land.
I'd love to see some examples of that.
Yeah, they point to names like Ahmad and Ahid, descriptions like the one with the sword and the staff, and even things about how people from distant lands would follow him.
Okay, that's fascinating. What about miracles? How do they fit into all this?
That's another cool thing. They explain miracles as signs, not as ways to force belief.
Yeah.
They're like confirmations for people who are already open to believing.
Right. They don't take away free will.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
one example they give is the multiplication of food. A small amount suddenly becoming enough to feed a ton of people.
It's like a glimpse into the power behind it all.
Yeah, and it's meant to be a powerful sign for those who are receptive. So speaking of signs, the Quran itself is seen as a major piece of evidence for Muhammad's prophethood.
Of course, the central text of Islam.
Right, but they describe it as more than just a book. They call it the pre-eternal translator of the great book of the universe. Like it's a key to understanding the whole cosmos.
The universe itself is a book, and the Quran is the translation. That's a powerful image.
And they talk about how it contains wisdom, laws, guidance for prayer, knowledge, all sorts of things. They say it's unlike anything else and challenge anyone to produce something comparable.
They see it as a miracle in its own right.
Exactly. It's full of deep explanations about God, about the unseen world. And they say it has these layers of meaning, you know. Different people can understand it on different levels.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but also the depth and complexity of the message. So we've got God, prophethood, the Quran. What about the afterlife? What do these texts say about that?
That's a really important one.
Yeah.
And the arguments they present are all about justice. They say that if you look at the universe, there's this inherent sense of justice, right? Like things should balance out.
Yeah.
But in this world, that doesn't always happen.
There's a lot of suffering, and sometimes it feels like the bad guys get away with everything.
Exactly. And they're like, if there's no afterlife, then a cruel person and their victim just cease to exist. That doesn't seem very just.
So the afterlife is a way of ensuring that ultimate justice prevails. It's not just about reward and punishment either. Right?
No, it's tied to this bigger idea of purpose.
Hmm.
They say that creation has a purpose, and that purpose can't just be limited to this temporary world. God is eternal, so they say there has to be an eternal realm that reflects his majesty.
It makes you think about our place in the grand scheme of things.
Right. And they actually use this analogy of spring. Like when spring comes, it brings life back to the earth, even though everything seemed dead before. They say it's a reflection of the resurrection.
It's like a promise of renewal.
Yeah. And they even talk about how seeds contain the essence, the deeds of the plants they came from, like a record of their past. It's a cool way of thinking about how our actions might have consequences beyond this life.
So it's not just an abstract concept, but something rooted in observable patterns in nature.
Exactly. And then there's this idea that, well, humans have this innate desire for permanence, you know? Like we don't want things to end.
It's like we're hardwired to long for something beyond this temporary existence.
And they say that God, who is all merciful and provides for all our needs, wouldn't he also provide for this deep desire?
It suggests that this longing for something more isn't just a random feeling, but a hint of something real.
Exactly. It's like a pointer towards the afterlife. So, wow, that was a lot. We've really covered a lot of ground today.
We have. We started with a fly and ended up contemplating the very nature of existence.
It's amazing how these seemingly simple questions can lead to such profound reflections. But that's the beauty of these texts, you know? They offer this whole framework built on logic and reason to understand these core Islamic beliefs.
You were looking for the why behind the what, and these texts provide a compelling case for the existence of one God, the role of prophets, the importance of the Quran, and the reality of the afterlife.
It all comes back to that idea of order, of interconnectedness, of justice, and ultimately the power of a single creator who brought it all into being. And here's a thought for you. If all this order, all this complexity isn't just a cosmic accident, if it's all part of a deliberate design,
Then it really changes how we view our own lives, doesn't it?
it makes you think about your purpose, your place in this grand scheme. And that's something worth pondering, I think.
If any of our listeners are interested in diving deeper into these ideas, the texts we've discussed offer a rich and rewarding starting point.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey. We'll see you next time.
You have listened to the Risale Noor podcasts, portal to the universe. For more, please visit risalenurtv.com/podcasts. Goodbye.